It is a pleasure for me to be here once again and participating in this powerful space for innovation, effective innovation of our region. I want to thank Suma for the possibility of participating in this workshop and to keep on developing this important initiative. So I will now say that the idea of this workshop it is to nourish the initiative with knowledge in order to scale successfully its innovations. And we're going to increase the impact in the education in the region, as it has been mentioned in the former webinar, as an introduction of scalability and its main components and the process of scalability. So what we're going to do now is bringing all of that knowledge into practice. So in this first part, we're going to leave some space for initiatives to introduce themselves, to introduce their initiatives, so they are better understood. So the workshop it is developed once knowing what this of the initiative is about. So I'd like to open the floor for the initiative. Sabrina, may you start?
Bonjour à tout le monde. Donc, je suis Sabrina Lipov, je suis la cofondatrice de l'association
I am Sabrina Lipa,
et notre
co-founder of this
initiative,
On
c'est
Continue Association,
d'intégrer l'égalité de genre dans les
and our
classes et
initiative
dans
is
les écoles.
called Integrating
Notre objectif
Gender
est
Equality
d'apprendre aux
in the
enseignants de
language
langue
lessons, and our main
à
goal
prendre en
is
compte
showing
l'égalité de genre dans leur pratique
teachers
pédagogique.
of mother
Et pour cela,
languages
nous
to
avons
consider gender equality
lancé
in their
plusieurs
practices.
actions. La
To do
première, c'est
so,
une formation
we have
sur
implemented many different
l'égalité de
actions. The
genre
first one, it
français
is
et
an
étrangère
online
scolaire
training
qui comprend
for
plusieurs modules
teachers,
pour
French teachers
lancer
as a foreign
différents
language.
concepts sur l'égalité
With it
ainsi
has
que
many
des
different
méthodes
modules to
pédagogiques.
teach this concept of
Ensuite, nous
equality
avons
and
également
some pedagogical
développé
techniques
un
as
kit
well.
numérique
Afterwards, we also have
qui sera disponible en
a
français
digital kit,
et espagnol
multilingual digital
pour les
kit
enseignants de langue moderne
in
qui
French,
reprendra
Spanish, and
la
English
formation en ligne.
for
Et
languages
nous avons
teachers,
également
which
organisé
once
des
again
ateliers
cover this
dans différents
online
pays de
content. We have
l'Amérique du
also
Sud,
organized some workshops
dont
in different
Saint-Vincent,
countries,
Sainte-Lucie, la Dominique et la Grenade.
which have to do with the initiative
Et
San Vicente, Dominica,
des personnes
and
faisant partie
Grenada,
d'associations locales dans chaque
workshops
pays
which have
pour
been
inciter
provided
les
by
jeunes
people who are part
à
of these local associations in each of the
passer,
countries in order to promote
à
youngsters
s'orienter vers des métiers un
to
peu plus
and to guide them
porteurs
towards
de
some
l'avenir, et
work
notamment les filles. Donc, à accéder
jobs which are
aux
more
métiers auxquels elles
interesting
n'ont pas accès
for the
actuellement
future,
dans le
and
marché du
especially
travail. Voilà. Merci.
for girls who don't really have this good access to the job market. Thank you. Thank you, Sabrina. Maria Cristina, would you like to continue?
Mucho gusto, Marco. Buenas tardes a todos. Espero se encuentren bien. Yo soy
Good
María
afternoon,
Cristina.
everyone. I am Maria
Estoy coordinadora
Cristina.
del
I am the
proyecto
coordinator of
Zamora
projects
Terán
from
y estamos
Zamora
ahorita
Teran
con una de las
Foundation.
iniciativas que es Conecta Aprende.
We have
Y
one initiative
actualmente
which is
nosotros
called
estamos
Conecta Aprenda.
trabajando con
We're currently
205
working with
jóvenes
205
nacionales en
adolescents
Francisco
in
Morazán y
the
Honduras.
Francisco Morazan and Jones
Esta
sector in
iniciativa
Honduras.
tiene
Our
como sede
initiative
profesional
promotes the
docente
teacher's
una plataforma
professional
para fortalecer las
work
competencias
for
para los
strengthening
docentes
competencies and
y
skills for
estudiantes
effective
mediante el
teaching for our
aprendizaje de las
students
dimensiones del
who are
currículo, pedagogía y tecnología.
included
Así que
technology,
por aquí vamos
pedagogy,
bien.
and,
Muchas
and
gracias.
curriculum. So that's what we're doing. Thank you. Thank you, Maria Cristina. Winnie?
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Winnie
Hello, everyone. I
Narváez.
am
Soy
Winnie
parte del equipo
Narvaez,
de
part
la
of the
Fundación Pedagógica Cooperación Genuina,
Pedagogical
quienes estamos desarrollando el
Foundation.
proyecto
We're
Fortalecimiento
developing
de
this project
Habilidades Digitales
strengthening
y de
skills in the
Competencias
learning
Digitales en
process
Estelí.
in Esteli
En la primera
municipality.
fase
In the first
hicimos
stage, we worked
evaluaciones
with the
de
assessment
en
of
lectura y
learning
matemática
in reading and
con
mathematics with
jóvenes nacionales.
840
También
children.
realizamos
And we
entrevistas
also did some
con los
interviews
responsables de los niños y las
to the
niñas.
adults who were
Y en
responsible
la
for these boys and
segunda
girls. And in
fase
the second
estamos
phase,
planificando
we're
trabajar
planning,
con 12
working
grupos
to work with 12 groups
para desarrollar
in
talleres
order to develop
innovadores
some
para el
innovation workshops for
fortalecimiento
the
y la mejora
strengthening and the
de los
improvement
desafíos en los
of
barrios
different challenges
identificados
in
y
the
en los
different
sectores
neighborhoods
de
that have been
desarrollo.
identified.
Y bueno, por aquí estamos
And
siempre contentas y
we're
contentos
really
de
happy to be here.
participar y compartir.
And we're happy for the possibility we have here to share with you all. Any representative from Partners in Education? I don't know if they're here, though. So let's continue. If they join, we'll give them the possibility to introduce themselves. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a presentation that Brad is going to share, and Maud has, Brad, he comes from this webinar. And also, Maud is going to be with us as well. She's got more than 20 years of experience in education and international development. She's got a master's degree in education by Teachers College of Columbia University and a master's degree of a secondary teacher by Ghent University in Belgium. She's a strategic advisor in education in PBOB, specializing in global education, training, and development of quality for teachers and school leaders. She coordinates the support of this initiative in PPS Scaling Sustainable Futures for young people in high school. So welcome, Brett and Maud. Thank you very much for being here.
Hi, everybody. It appears that it's possible that Maud's connectivity, it may take a moment to return. So let me just, in her absence, let you all know how honored we should be that she's going to give us some of her time. I think that in a way there's so many questions one asks oneself about scaling, but I think there might be three primary ones. And one of those is, what is it? What is scaling and how does it work? And I tried to talk a little bit about that before. A second central question that you all probably ask yourselves is my innovation scalable? Or what would it mean to scale my innovation? And that's an incredibly important question, but that's not the question we're going to take on today. In a moment, when I turn things over to Maud, I think that she's going to help us think through a question that has to do with what can I predict will be the primary difficulties and the primary assets with scaling my innovation. And she and her organization, VVOB, have worked with others over a couple of years, and they've developed and piloted and revised and developed again, and they continue to work on an incredibly important checklist, which is called the Education Scalability Checklist. And so I think we're really fortunate to have her here today. She's based in Belgium, but I believe she just traveled to Uganda a couple of days ago, and it's probably the middle of the night there. So Maud, thank you so much for joining us and for helping us think through the scalability checklist.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and good evening indeed for me. So I've traveled to Uganda, so apologies. Indeed, the connectivity is not very stable here, but hopefully the internet will hold throughout the workshop. I'm really happy to be here. The education scalability checklist that Brad just mentioned already has been tried in quite a few continents already. It's been tried in Asia, Africa, and in Latin America, also through the Ecuador team of VVOB. And I'm so happy that together to try it out and see whether it can expand also its use in Latin America and the Caribbean. So by way of introduction, I will first start sharing my screen. And by way of introduction, Brad and I will go into two questions. The first one is on what does it mean for an initiative to be scalable? And the other one, we'll look into a few tools that will support initiatives like yours to go to scale. I hope I can share my screen. Can you see it?
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, so let us start on the first question. Now, what does it mean for an initiative to be scalable? So very important for us who created the scalability checklist, but I think it's what Brad explained earlier, is to keep in mind that this question of scalability of an education initiative does not really have a yes or no. Put it differently, for innovators such as yourselves, it's not very helpful to wonder, is our initiative scalable? So depending on the features of the initiative, it can be easier or more difficult to scale within a certain context. And that issue of context is paramount, as you also mentioned before. So the scale our initiative, for example, from 12 schools across St. Lucia, Dominica, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines to all schools across these island states. So it is the features of your initiative in a certain context that really will be feeding the reflection on the scalability. So if you ask the question in that way, then you're also invited to reflect on what you can do and which strategies that you can put in place to make that scaling easier. And of course, also what you can best avoid, because it will make scaling more difficult. So in principle, there are two things that you can act on to make scaling easier. First of all, you can act on your initiative itself, so the characteristics and the features of the initiative itself. And secondly, you can also aim to and indeed act on the context in which you try to scale it. So that context can be more or less enabling. The former, so acting on that initiative itself, of course, it's much more under your own control. So we would recommend that you start there because it's easier generally to do, right, than to change the context and the environment in which you're trying to scale. Then the second thing that is good to keep in mind here is the type of challenges that you will run into during your scaling journey will depend on the pathway to scale that you have chosen. So in the previous session, we got a very nice and clear explanation of the different pathways to scale that are a possibility. Even indeed this idea that Herman raised, that of intertwining pathways, it really appealed to me as well, and would be nice to think through that more. But if we think just of two of the options of pathways, challenges will look very different when you have chosen for institutionalization or this vertical scaling that was mentioned before. So that is a situation where the organization where the initiative or the innovation originates, so you as originating organizations, whether you want to embed that your initiative or the innovation within the formal education system, where it will then, whether the idea is it will then become led and sustained by government actors, or whether in fact you're rather opting for a pathway that is referred to as horizontal scaling, or branching is another word for that, in which case you as the originating organization want to increase your own capacity to offer the initiative at multiple sites in new locations or to new target groups. So whether the ease or the difficulty of scaling, the challenges that you will come across, and of course the strategies that you will need to put in place to advance and keep pushing for scale will differ according to the pathway that you've chosen. So good to keep in mind is that, or we would encourage you to think through your pathway early on, think through what really fits best for our situation and the way we want to advance with our organization and our initiative. And also keep in mind that VVOB, Brookings, and the other organizations that were involved in the development of the education scalability checklist, we were all looking at scaling as institutionalization. So we really came at it from the angle of what does it mean if an initiative is transferred from organizations such as ours who develop and start testing and piloting innovations if we want to transfer it into government systems. So the checklist as a tool also works best, I would say, or it's easiest, the fit is best if that is your chosen pathway to scale. And it's also with that pathway to scale in mind that we identified 7 dimensions that matter or that will influence the ease or difficulty of scaling. And in the tool, for those of you who have already had an opportunity to look at it, those 7 dimensions are called model categories. To scale, when there is a convincing scaling strategy, when the initiative is credible, when there is strong support for the initiative and the change that it entails, relative advantage over the current situation and alternative solutions, when it is easy to transfer into the existing education system, when there is a good fit between the initiative and the education system, and there is a sustainable source of funding. And all of those dimensions are unpacked in the tool with a list of items. So there is these various dimensions are explained better in the tool, and the part of the tool or the way the tool works is that you will assess your initiative on each of these dimensions to see what the ease or difficulty of scaling might be. I think I can then move to the next slide. Sorry, I'm jumping between screens, so I'm juggling a little bit. Okay. So I've already started talking, of course, about one of the tools that is available to support you in that in your scaling process. And so the one that we are focusing on today during the workshop is the education scalability checklist. And it is actually based on a sector agnostic scalability checklist that was originally developed by Larry Cooley at MSI, who was also mentioned earlier by Brad, and Johannes Lin at Brookings. And later on, Brookings, VVOB, and together with a few other organizations, adapted it to the education sector. And the checklist is an Excel-based tool to make a broad assessment of how easy or hard it will be to scale up, and specifically to institutionalize an initiative, to identify opportunities for and constraints to scaling, and then to see that assessment or to use that assessment as the basis for developing and following up on an institutionalization or a scaling strategy. So to plan actions to increase the viability for scaling. And then there is also one part of the tool that allows you to follow up on how the scalability of an education initiative evolves over time. So important, of course, if you would start using the tool, is that, as Brad mentioned earlier as well, scaling is not a linear process, so we cannot expect to be growing in the 7 dimensions all the time. It may very well happen that we have increased in a way the scalability or made it easier to scale, and later in time we need to take a step back due to changing circumstances. The tool is designed for practitioners, so implementers, such as all of us, I think, in the room, for policymakers, and also for funders who are interested in seeing something, an initiative move further to scale. At VVOB, we have started using it in 8 partner countries. So Ecuador was already mentioned. Most of the countries, sub-Saharan Africa, and then also in Asia, in Vietnam and Cambodia. Brad also mentioned it was picked up by the New York public school system. So that was nice to hear as well. And it has also been used through the network of global school leaders who have also partner organizations in some 7 countries, mostly in Asia and Africa. So it's really nice to see that there's an in from the Latin American Caribbean region. And the checklist works very well hand in hand with two other tools that were developed by Brookings and that Brad can talk more about.
Yes, so in conjunction with this, we recommend two additional tools that have been developed by us at the Millions Learning Project at the Brookings Institution. One of them is called the Institutionalization Tracker. And just to build on what Maud has said, you could imagine 4 different possibilities for scaling. You could have an innovation that begins outside of government and then ultimately, as it's scaled, is institutionalized within government. And that's the most common, but it's not the only way of doing it. You could also have one that begins outside of government and is scaled and stays outside of government. Or you could have one that begins in government and stays inside of government, but gets built out. That's the New York City example that Maud just mentioned. You could also ostensibly have one that originates inside government and then scales by going outside of government. So you can have outside to in, outside to outside, inside to inside, or in to outside. Of those 4 potential pathways, institutionalization is the one where it starts outside the government, and part of the goal of scaling is to have it embedded in and ultimately taken over by the government. And so we at Brookings developed an institutionalization tracker that is a tool to be used to identify and measure the progress of one's efforts to institutionalize the initiative or the innovation over time. And we offer that to you. We've just put it in the chat, and that's the link. We have it in French, we have it in English, we have it in Spanish. You're welcome to use it, and we think it's used very well in conjunction with the checklist. The second thing that's also being put in the chat box, is our scaling strategy workshop. And so when a team or an organization has an innovation or approach that it wants to deepen or expand, it should be thinking about scaling right from the start. We've talked about that already today. This is a worksheet that we developed for how to plan for scaling. And it's how to plan the scaling strategy that might be best for your innovation and your purposes in your context of choice. And so that tool is also available in French and English and Spanish. And we put a link to that in the chat here, and you're welcome to use it. And we think these 3 tools, the 2 in the chat and the checklist that Maud is talking about now, work very well together. Thanks, Maud.
So the worksheet, I would indeed encourage you to definitely take a look. And because you will notice when you open the education scalability checklist, there is actually an action plan sheet in there. But planning in Excel is not so very user friendly. What we are going to do in the future is to make sure that the worksheet and the action sheet in the checklist are completely aligned, so that these work perfectly hand in hand, and then it will be the user friendly. And we're always looking forward to tips to improve that user friendly. Also, the first time education checklist in an online setting. It has been many of the countries where we work, we have actually made it from an Excel-based tool into a tool. And today we're going to try out the experiment of making it into an online tool. So let's see whether this is a successful experiment and worthy of scaling itself. I would like to invite 2 different groups who have volunteered to demonstrate education scalability checklist, or at least part of the checklist. So Pierre, Roatan, and FZT, could you please go ahead and open the Mentimeter? So you can open the Mentimeter either by scanning the QR code or by to menti.com and then entering that code. See that your hand is raised.
Brad,
Maud, Brad, I'm sorry, there is a problem. Innovation of Pierre is not, they are not present today. They have a connection problem. They are letting me know that they have tried, but have not been able to enter. I know that they were a team of the volunteers. I'd like to know, Maud, Brad, if you think that we can do it only with Zamora Terán, or maybe invite another initiative that spontaneously would like to
Yes, yes.
participate.
We can definitely start with the FCT and then see how it goes. And I will try to figure out how to take the Mentimeter back then. Sorry that I didn't notice this because it was just introductions. Connection dropped. I also read that I'm a little choppy, so I'm going to turn off my camera for that reason. Hopefully that will make the sound quality better as well. Okay, so I'm hoping that that FCT can go to enter the Mentimeter. And then in the meantime, I would also like to invite and FUPECG to open the education computers. It will be easier to follow. Link to the checklist is available in the chat.
Cualquier duda también pueden ir escribiendo por el chat o consultando.
And any question you have, you can also be writing it in the chat or letting us know.
Can I get this up? When you have the checklist open and when you are in the Mentimeter, when FCT is in the Mentimeter, so others do not need to go there.
Yo creo que lo tengo abierto, es donde dice en qué
I
medida.
think I have it open. Is it in what measure? Does it reflect your individual? Is it that page? Is that, it says it shows complexity if you, it is added to the educational system with easily CBOA. But I don't know what CBOA means. That's the Excel document? I don't have Excel. The checklist is the Excel file.
Yes, so the checklist is the Excel file that you can find through that one. I would like to invite all the participants who are not.
Yo no tengo ningún documento Excel.
I don't have any Excel document. It
So
can
there
be
is
downloaded.
there should be.
What link? The first, second, or third link? What link do I have to click on? The last link. Click on that and you can see Mentimeter. No, no, no. No, we are not supposed to enter the Mentimeter. No, we're looking for the Excel one.
Debería entrar al Mentimeter.
La lista de Excel la puede
The
descargar
Excel
donde
file
dice
can be downloaded
descargar lista de
where it
verificaciones,
says you
escalabilidad,
can
y está
download.
Tracy, pero se la voy a enviar también.
I'm going to send it to you by WhatsApp. Thank you, Winnie.
Perfecto. Ahí también Tracy la compartió en el chat.
Tracy shared it in the chat.
Súper. Entonces,
Wonderful.
¿no?
Ya,
¿Podría
ya la tengo abierta.
Okay, I have it open now.
Y ya.
Sí, gracias.
Sabrina, ¿pudo acceder a la lista también?
Were you able to access it
¿La
as
lista de
well?
verificación?
The verification list?
María Cristina, ¿pudieron acceder al Mentimeter?
Were you able to get into the Mentimeter, whoever is supposed to be in there?
Perfecto. No sé si está ahí.
Maud, I don't know if you're still there.
There, yes.
Maud, Brad, somebody from the team?
So yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I gather that
Tenemos que
everybody
leer
has
todas las
downloaded.
instrucciones primero. Vamos a llevar 3 horas.
I'm sorry, I didn't
So
catch what he said. Go ahead.
So I'm hoping that everybody has been able to download the checklist from the that was posted in the chat. And when you have the Excel open, then the sheet that is best to go to is called individual. And then for FZT, and I'm sorry because I'm not
individual
100% sure who is
Listo.
online.
Aquí estamos.
I'm going
Evaluación
to
individual.
count that Maria Cristina is online.
2023.
Sí.
0503.
Sí, María Cristina está online, ¿no?
Yes, Maria Cristina is online.
Okay. So for Maria Cristina and team, I hope.
What is the idea now, Hernan is asking?
¿O cómo?
The idea is for us to fill it out, or what do you need us to do?
No. So the idea is that Maria Cristina and her team will show you part of how the education scalability checklist works. So if you have the tool open in Excel, then the part that we are going to try out online is in the sheet that is called individual 1. So it's the third sheet. And we are going to try out 2 steps. First of all, in that particular sheet, we are going to try out the individual scoring. And the individual scoring is scoring on those 32 items that are grouped into the 7 dimensions or the 7 model categories that I mentioned earlier. And in fact, Maria Cristina and her team have chosen one particular model category to focus on. So they have decided to focus on the demonstration on model category C, which has to do, or dimension C, which has to do with how strong the support for the initiative is and the change that it entails. And of course, scaling generally will be easier if there is strong support for the initiative, and it will be more difficult if there is not strong support for the initiative. And as you can see in the tool, so that particular model category has 6 items, has no more than 6, I think it has 7 items next to it. So it goes from number 6, 7, 8, 9 all the way to 13. So there are 13 statements that have to do with how strong the support is for the particular initiative. And so part of the exercise, or what is involved in doing the education scalability checklist, is to see what is the status or what is the situation of my particular initiative vis-a-vis the statement that is being made in the education scalability checklist. So for example, item number 6 would be if the initiative addresses an objectively significant persistent problem that affects a lot of learners and has a significant impact. If that is the case, so this indeed you agree with this statement, it describes the situation well, then in the education scalability checklist, what you would do is you would give that item a score of A. On the other hand, if you would say that is not the case, we cannot really say that our initiative addresses such an objectively significant persistent problem, etc. So if you are rather in agreement with the statement that is on the right-hand side of that individual sheet in the education scalability checklist, if it's rather there, then in the checklist would invite you to give that item or give your initiative a score of C on the in the checklist. If you feel, and that's very often the case, in fact, if you believe that the situation is somewhere in the middle or it's more complex than those statements in the extreme, then you would score the initiative a B in the middle of so in the middle column of that.
Disculpe, ¿y cómo damos el puntaje?
How do we give it a score? With an X?
Yes, indeed. So if you
Pero no funciona, no puedo poner la X.
But I can't, it doesn't allow me to change, to place an X.
Normally what happens is if you click, so if you believe that you want to give the score A, for example, then you go to column E of the Excel. And normally if you click on one of those cells, so if you click in cell E9, for example, normally when you click on it, you can automatically see a drop-down menu that allows you to choose an X or 2 bars. And the 2 bars mean that this is not what you want, right? An X is you agree it should have a score A.
No funciona.
Creo, Germán, que hay que habilitar edición. Arriba.
The drop down isn't working. I think you know that you need to enable where you can modify. I think maybe you have it only in the where you cannot edit. No, the option is not like the drop down bar. So you can get in there and then interact with the Excel. The drop down option is not working. The arrow is there, but we cannot select. There's nothing that comes up.
Okay.
Lo voy a tratar de abrir otra vez.
To reassure you,
I'm going to try to open it again.
Okay, but to reassure you, we are not going to use the Excel today. So we have translated the Excel tool into a Mentimeter exercise for today. And that's what the Excel is there for.
Está?
Where is that then? Where should we go now?
So only the participants of FCT should go to the Mentimeter. And the exercise that we are doing is for the Fundación to show how the tool works and for others to watch from that, and then we reflect on
No
that
se puede con el,
experience.
perdón, no se puede con el Excel.
We can't do it with the Excel.
And
I
that's okay.
downloaded it 3 times and it doesn't allow me to edit.
Okay, so then let's have, then I can resend it afterwards, so that we are sure that you have a version that works, but don't worry about that now for the workshop. I'm hoping that can Maria Cristina and her team confirm that they can open the Mentimeter?
No sé dónde está, ni sé cuál es.
Sí,
Dígame dónde lo
lo
encuentro
tenemos
ese.
abierto.
Just tell me, where do I find that? What am I supposed to do?
Esto va a ser un ejemplo.
No,
de
this
la
is going to be an example, Herman.
por el Mentimeter.
We're going to show you on the Mentimeter, and then you can do it. You will receive the file. This is just an example. So now we are going to show you this example on the screen. That's the idea. We will show you on the screen.
Entonces no hacemos nada ahorita, ¿verdad? Nosotros como FUPEC.
So the rest of us don't do anything right now then, is that correct?
Yes.
What I understand that what you can do is start looking at this list of verification, the checklist for your own personal work of your initiative, so you can have it as a reference.
Yes,
So-
and having it next to you or looking at it or looking at the items will make it easier to follow the demonstration that we are going to show.
Dale, de acuerdo.
Okay. Can I get a confirmation that the team of Maria Cristina is in the Menti? And
Estamos en Menti, pero no nos aparece la pregunta para hacer la votación.
So we're
No nos aparece todavía.
we do not see the question yet. Are we supposed to do? Okay, now I see the question. Can you indicate how we could to continue, Maud?
Parece
Ya
que
votamos nosotros.
sí, parece que Mod se como que se perdió un poco la señal, ¿o no?
I think Maud may have lost her signal. I have. Is there someone who can maybe replace Maud in the meantime?
Well, I can just sort of talk to fill the space. I'm so sorry that the technology is failing us here. What I might suggest is when Maud returns that she can just talk us through this. I think we were ambitious in believing that we could actually walk one of the teams through some of these questions as a way to showcase how it works. I don't have access to the Mentimeter, and therefore I'm not really in a great position to take over. I hope that Maud will join us. And if she does, I'm wondering if, and let me know what you all think, I'm wondering if the technology and the use of the checklist is becoming a little too complicated, and we should spend our time talking about it instead of actually using it. What do you all think? Maybe by a show of hands or thumbs
Sí.
up if you think we should do that. Okay. And do you again, I'm just kind of filling up the time until we hear from Maud again, but do you all understand the purpose of the checklist? And do you understand this notion about how it offers questions, and the questions will allow a team to identify for itself among particular items within particular categories for their own specific situation as to whether they're going to expect to face some resistance or some difficulty around the item, or whether they think they're in good shape. Does that part make sense, or should I explain that in more detail? I will presume that means that that's relatively clear. I'm wondering if the way we can use this time until we get Maud back again is that if you have particular questions about what you've learned related to this checklist so far.
Hola, hola, hola. ¿Cómo estás? ¿Me escuchas?
Hello, can you
Buenas.
hear me?
Yes.
Fíjese que yo tenía varias inquietudes. Por ejemplo,
I had a couple questions. For example,
ustedes saben que hay varias
you
preguntas
know
que
that there are many questions that we chose C because we think we have enough time to be able to affirm or negate.
cogimos la categoría número C. Entonces, ahorita, por ejemplo, en el Menti
So for example, now in the Menti, we are seeing the question where it says, to what measure do you affirm or the problem that how much okay, objectively speaking, how do you confront the question number 6? So we have to present evidence to be able to affirm individually, or do we do it in a group session?
The way this can work well is that if individuals first go through the questions and assign their own scores to them, and then afterwards they come together as a group and then they look at their individual scores. This has a couple of values. One of them is it's very interesting for a group to realize that different individuals in the same group will answer those same questions differently. And that can give rise to some conversation about why that's true. And then secondly, it can create some consensus as the groups try and figure out what is the answer as a collective that they have to each question. It can create some consensus around where there are difficulties that they can predict and where things might be a little bit easier as they move forward. So this tool is really for individual use, both at the individual level and at the group level. Maud, it seems that you may be back. You don't need to turn your video on
Yo
because I know
quisiera
you have-
aportar algo.
I would like to also say something. Can I?
Lo que yo quería decir con respecto
What
a la
I
pregunta
wanted to say regarding the question, the previous question, and the answer, I think a lot depends on the characteristics of the organization. I am in agreement with the answer that has to be individually or personally, in the sense that each person, their contribution regarding on how you look at your organization and how you look at the project can be a subject of scaling. I think it's important. So that personal perception is very important. I think also that you have to see the areas where the organizations are also there. If you have different areas, it would also be interesting by area that you could meet the different groups so they can socialize, and after they socialize, and then seeing how they can, so we call that the rule of 3 of the social educational projects by area, and then like the plenary, like the bigger group. Yeah. I think this list of checklist is very interesting to decide regarding scaling. I'm completely in agreement, but at the same time, it is a checklist that allows us also to value how we are doing with the project, and maybe what are areas or weak points that maybe we do not allow us to scale, or where we are going to need to place a lot of attention to, especially in case that we decide to scale. So that question of that rule of 3 is also very valid, I think, personally. Whether it has to do with self-assessment, critical self-assessment of how we are doing as a project.
Yeah, I think that, Herman, I think that you're exactly right. I think that using this tool has got several different levels of value. And one of them is that individuals can go through this and they can, first of all, familiarize themselves with the kind of dimensions that will be required to scale. So they can essentially learn a little bit more about what it means to scale an innovation as they think through these questions. Secondly, the individuals can for themselves think through where they believe the innovation is could have some trouble or have some deficits versus where the innovation as it scales might have some strengths. And so we might call that the first category. The second category that you mentioned, and I think that's a really excellent one, is that this is a process of team building and professional development for the organization itself as it tries to reconcile the fact that individuals might have different answers on the same questions. That requires the individuals, but as a group, to talk about why they see this same question differently. And in doing so, they're talking to each other. They're developing some clarity, a shared vision, a shared understanding of the innovation. And so I think in some ways that's incredibly useful professional development or team building that will become useful later on in the process. And then the third thing that I might mention is the work of reconciling the individual answers into consensus creates a kind of inter-rater reliability, or a practice by which the different groups can better understand the whole of the innovation. So I think that using this tool has got different kinds of value. The primary way that I think this tool can be useful is that it's a systematic way to reflect on your innovation in terms of its scalability. I wonder if others have questions or comments.
Creo que Carlos tiene una pregunta de la Fundación Zamora Terán.
Carlos, it seems you've got a question there. Yes, I've got another question. Brad, I saw that when you get into the group analysis, there are assessment, many different categories. Sometimes we see that you get an average, and then later you define some action plans. So what score should I have so I can create an action plan? For example, we all chose A. So up until which point this category, which I am checking, requires 1, 2, or 3 more actions in order to meet the goal or answer the questions. So is there any range or a scoring? I'm talking about the group analysis. Once
Right.
individual analysis has been done, then you have a calculation. In the example we just saw, I am observing the Excel spreadsheet. One has 3 points and some others have 7 points, depending on the score for each question. So you get an average. So which score? How do I define how to start an action? How many actions should I select per category? And when should I, or when there's no action required?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't think I'm the best one to answer it. I hope that Maud has come back and she can answer that question. My general understanding is that it's not that there needs to be a particular quantitative threshold, but I don't want to answer your question wrong. And so, so Maud maybe can answer that better than I can.
But I think you answered it, Brad. So it is the scoring aspect, or when we developed the tool, I think there was on the one hand, we realized that people are very keen on scores and like to see how things progress over time. And that is why we built in this feature where your individual scores that are an A, B, or C, so a little bit less numeric, and so not so a little bit less feeling like you're getting you're doing a test and you have to score 32 out of 32 points. We saw a risk actually in pointing it down in numbers. On the other hand, there were also people in our group who really wanted to have this spider graph at the beginning that allows you to trace progress over time and to see the waxing and waning really of your scaling process. And that is why it is translated into that numeric score. But it on is the average of everything but all A's, then the conclusion is not necessarily, well, we need to do nothing here. Or if your score, your average score may be low, then it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do a lot of things in order to improve your score. It's really, the tool is really meant to stimulate that discussion on where, which areas or which dimensions are we expecting more challenges, and where do we think we can expect or things will be easier. Sometimes the things that are going well and to really even like boost those, because then you can advance faster rather than to pay too much attention to many of that are facing, right? So the low hanging, sometimes if you do that a little bit extra action and you have that low hanging fruit, maybe will really boost the energy at that point and help you push forward. So that may be more important sometimes than focusing on areas where the scores are not so high and it might be more difficult to progress. Generally, of course, when you do this exercise and the spider graph is created automatically, then you do see the dimensions where you, in your appreciation as a group, feel that things are moving in the direction that they need to be, and others where you feel they are not. So of course, then typically you will start to plan actions to move those scores upwards, right? But it's not a matter of how many actions according to a certain score. It's how many actions are feasible within a certain amount of time, and can you deserve priority at a certain amount, at a certain period in time.
Muchas gracias, Maud. Bueno, creo que se está dando un buen
Thank you very
espacio
much. This is a nice time to make good use of the material. So Winnie, Maria Cristina, do you have any other questions related to this material, this checklist? So later, you can take the most of it. And since we have Maud and Brad here, well, they can answer some of our questions. So Winnie, Sabrina, Maria Cristina. Well, I believe that we need some time to answer this truly, to do the whole exercise, but we need it to work properly, because I mean, right now the options, we downloaded it and we cannot really choose alternative there. We're going to send it again. We're going to make sure that it works. Thank you. Sabrina, Maria Cristina, any questions? Any concerns or comments? Well, in our case, as Carlos said, what we wanted to mention as a foundation, we're going to do the exercise. We will work this in groups. It is what we were suggesting, because in that way, each of us, we already worked it individually. We have a perception and we got a score. Nevertheless, we have already planned for next week having this session all together as a group in order to see how much we believe this initiative it is going to be of a good support. So please send the Excel so we can work on it. It will be easier for, because right now we're doing this manually. Okay. Sabrina?
Yes, for me, I was able to modify the document. I had no problem. I was able to fill in most of the categories, most of the indicators. Our only issue is that our initiative is not really advanced. So there are a lot of things that we could not fill out. And but yes, it showed the main problems. Well, it put into evidence the main problems that we have already identified. And yes, it's interesting. And yes, I have been able to complete the whole page for individual evaluation. So it's good. But yes, we still have a lot of things to do, and yeah, I guess we have to continue our initiative because we are still unfortunately at the beginning. So I think as we progress, we will be able to maybe change or add things. So yeah, I think it's a great tool, and I was able to familiarize myself with it. So yeah, I think it's great, and I will continue using it with the progress of our initiative.
Me alegro mucho,
Maybe
Sabrina.
if I can I jump in? Because I
Me
think
gustaría
for
decir
all
algo.
for every initiative that is in early stages, and VVOB also has quite a few of those, it's very typical, I would say, that you don't have even enough information to properly reflect on certain of the items in the tool, right? So for example, in the very early on, it is very unlikely that you would know whether your initiative actually has relative advantage towards other solutions. It would be very difficult to know, is my initiative more effective than any other solution that might also be out there, for example, because you haven't done the evaluations yet, etc., etc. So in that case, what I've noticed that teams do is that they just standard opt for the B, because or they opt for the C because they think, okay, let's give ourselves the lowest score, just to remind themselves that it is an area to work on. Not necessarily urgently, not everything is always for now, right? Something can be worked on later, but as a reminder, okay, we will put it B or C, and then sometimes they park it and come back to it, sometimes even a year later. It can, or more time, but we are now at the phase where we have used it for 1 year. What it also helps to remind us, or what we have found that it helps to remind us, where we lack information, that collecting information is already very valuable, because sometimes that in and of itself will help us to refine the initiative or have a more constructive dialogue also with each other. Because very often we find that one person in the organization may have certain information about the initiative, but another may not. So putting your heads together and actually exchanging information and getting on the same page can also really help, we find, in doing the exercise, but also in moving forward. Brad, you also hand up earlier, so please.
I just wanted to ask Sabrina if going through those questions gave you a chance to learn anything new about your innovation, things that you didn't already know, and if so, what were they?
Well, first, I realized that what I had in mind for scalability was like just the top of the iceberg, and there were so many other things that I needed to consider to be able to scale our initiative. And I must also admit that all the items made me quite worried, because actually I realized that we were like, we didn't have all the tools and all the power to scale the initiative ourselves, and we were so dependent on all the other organizations and the government, and actually we have some problems to implement our initiative because of the government. So what I thought would be quite easy, like to reach other countries, to reach other schools, to be able to reach more teachers. And I have already started to realize that it was not that easy. And probably the list of items and everything that had to be taken into account showed me that, like, we have such a long way to go, like, to be able to scale. So yeah, probably in that aspect.
Muchas gracias, Sabrina, Brad. Oh,
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Brad.
no sé, escuchar el comité de seguimiento quizás también de Sabrina.
Maybe Michelle,
Charmaine,
Charmaine, Would you like to add something?
una percepción de lo
Do you have
que
any
hace el
thoughts of what has
punto
been
de
said?
vista.
Any comments about this checklist?
Si es que, bueno, si es que no hay más dudas
If there's no more doubts,
de alguna de las iniciativas también,
or maybe if someone from the initiatives,
no sé si quieren
if
cerrar
there are no
con algo,
questions,
con-
I don't know, would you like to close with a thought, Brad or Maciel? I don't know.
Yo solo quería
I
retomar
just
lo
want
que
to
decía
say,
Sabrina también, y lo que
coming back
decía
on what Sabrina mentioned,
Brad
I mean, Brad mentioned in a former workshop,
importante de pensar
I mean,
la escalabilidad del proyecto en su etapa
thinking about
inicial
scalability,
también. O sea, como
it is important to think about
planear
scalability
la
at the very
escalabilidad.
beginning, early
Eso es
stage.
lo
When
que
it,
me parece
that has to be included at the very beginning. It's really important.
lo ve como algo muy lejano.
We see it as something that is far away because, as you well said, sometimes there are many external factors or many other factors that we have not even considered. But it is really important that since the very beginning, when we create a project, we should immediately think about this item or this dimension of if it is scalable or not and how to do it. And as Herman said in the webinar, we need to dream about it. We need to think big. Sometimes it is like an utopia, but utopia also moves us. And it's really important to have this idea of scalability. And once again, to land this a little bit, when talking about tools, I mean, these tools presented by Mod and Brad are fundamental in order to acknowledge and understand if our project can be scalable. And maybe one or two items might be there in the parking lot. Then later, you can tackle them in order to get this scalability. So it is really interesting what you're presenting. This is a material which is really enriching for innovations and for any project that we want to start. For it to have an impact, of course, it has to be scalable. And that is in relation to, I mean, it's basically to improve the lifestyle of citizens, education. So it is a fundamental tool for the work that we're developing. So thank you very much.
Así es. Germán,
German,
Sí, por lo que yo he podido ver,
for what I have seen
antes cuando
and from what I saw before when you sent it,
investigar un poquito,
and I did some research, I found things about this scalability through BOB.
que lo conozco además
I know it.
por mi origen, me parece un
So I believe that this is a tool which is quite interesting. At the same time, I also believe that we need to value all of the tools, all of the instruments, as tools. That means this is a medium. It is not the main goal, right? Working with an instrument, with a tool, for not doing anything with it, it makes no sense. We need to work the tool, we need to complete it with having a goal in mind. And one of these goals, it is scalability, because that's why the possibility of scalability and the strategy of scalability, it is relevant. With that goal, we can work on it. But I am convinced that that tool cannot give guidelines when we're not ready for scalability. And therefore, we need to keep on working different things where we're weak in order to strengthen the tool. But at the same time, that is going to allow us to socialize different perceptions, personal opinions, and also group opinions. Because, for instance, the visualization of the technical viewpoint in comparison with the administrative team talking about the project, it might be different and it's not going to be the same, maybe. So, therefore, it is interesting to compare those elements. And when there are differences, where there are weaknesses and strengths, I mean, the why that is there and which are the elements which define that this is a weakness in order to see which are the things that we can work on and which are the things that we cannot work on, which are not in our scope. So therefore, I believe that this is a huge opportunity for thinking about it, for reflection, for the critical reflection, facing scalability, but also we can include some other goals. What's important here is not seeing this in a technical way or too technical. Of course, we need to follow the rules of the instrument, of the tool. There are some rules also for different games, right? But the nice thing about games, I mean, sometimes we change the rules. So in that sense, it is also important to use those tools, those instruments, not as straitjacket, but this, it is going to be a tool and we can adapt it to our context. Because more important than the instrument, it is the interpretation of the results that we're going to obtain. So this is just a comment that I wanted to make. And thank you. Thank you for sharing this tool, this instrument, and of course, it is going to be useful for all of us. And it will allow us to make decisions and to create strategies. Thank you. Thank you, Herman. Thank you for your comment. So we want to emphasize the importance of scalability as a tool that can be in many different parts of the process of innovation, different initiatives. And it can enrich initiatives on the way. It doesn't really belong to just one part. It is not linear, as we said before. So scalability can always be present. And with these tools that Brad and Maud has presented to us, with this understanding, we're going to have a task to make this assessment for each of the initiatives. So they can have their own innovation process. So I want to thank you all. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Maud. And I want to thank all of you for your participation, for your time. If you want to give some final words, Brad or Maud.
I have a few closing thoughts, less about scalability and more about scaling in general. And so there are 5 things that I want to leave you with, but I promise they're short. One of them is I was listening to what Sabrina was mentioning, and I know that scaling can seem very difficult and very big. And that's when I start thinking about the power of dreaming. I once listened to a song by Joni Mitchell, and she said, love has 2 faces, hope and despair. And I think scaling has 2 faces, hope and despair, and it requires balancing the 2 of them. The second thing I want to talk about is that we didn't spend a lot of time today talking about the need for research and for data, but that's incredibly important to be studying the progress and the potential for scaling the innovation all the way along through the scaling journey. The third thing I want to say is that some of this is learning by doing. This is not a perfect science. This is in many ways an art, and one needs to develop a stance where you're going to learn along the way, make some mistakes, learn from the mistakes, course correct, pay attention to things that are outside of your control, try and do the best you can with what you can control, and you need some support and some patience and a little bit of luck. The next thing I want to say is how important it is to engage other people outside of your team in this work right from the beginning. And you will need different groups of people at different points in the scaling process. And so it requires being thoughtful, and it really requires working well with others. If you're thinking about working with government decision makers, it becomes important to see your work through their eyes. They have different incentives and different constraints, and they have different ways of thinking than you might have. And so you can't convince them to see it your way. You have to fit your work into their views and use their views to advance your scaling. On the other side is working with community members, with children, with teachers, with families, and that requires humility, and it requires authentic curiosity, and it requires the ability to listen to them. And I think that becomes incredibly important. And then the last thing that I want to mention is that the broader enabling environment will have an awful lot to do with your scaling process, whether or not you're aware of it. And so don't neglect the politics. Don't neglect the fact that there will be external shocks to the system, things that you could never have predicted. Think about the financing dimensions. Think about changes in the context, and understand that that broader environment should be understood and predicted and harnessed in service of the innovation of your own, but that, and I'm quoting Fabio Segura here, it's the false assumptions we make outside of our scaling model that usually cause us the most trouble. I really enjoyed spending time with you all. I hope we have a chance to talk again. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. We want to keep learning alongside of you, and we want to be useful in whatever ways we can moving forward.
Brad, perdona, quizás puedes poner tu mail
Brad,
en el chat.
could you please share your email in the chat box? So, and Maud, could you please share your email in the chat box in case they want to contact you, right? Thank you very much. Thank you for those thoughts. Maud, would you like to compliment or give some final words?
Maybe a final one, also thinking on what Sabrina said about the tool looking maybe daunting, and then what said about the tool, about it indeed just being a tool and us not being slaves, in fact, to the instruments that we create, right? So what we have also seen is a lot of the teams that are using it are simplifying it, first of all. So they are, we have one of our teams has reduced, for example, haven't quite delved into it yet, but has been able to reduce 30, still the 7 dimensions reduced, so that they, okay, these are the crucial ones for this, the early stages that we are in, and they will expand the reflection later on. To do that, we would suggest that the 7 dimensions, you have a broad, you keep a broad view of your initiative. But yeah, I will agree with Herman's remark on using it without becoming, seeing it as a rigid thing.
Muchas gracias, Maud. Bueno,
Thank you very much, Maud. So this tool, it is a medium, as Herman said. This allowed the process to run, and you have given us plenty of thoughts about it. So the idea is to keep on contributing to these innovations, to these initiatives. So we hope this tool to be useful so you can get your achieve your goals. So thank you, Maud. Thank you, Brad. I want to thank all of the initiatives for your participation, active participation. It's been a pleasure for me to be here in this session as well. And of course, each of the initiatives are so powerful in order to improve equality, inclusion, and the quality of educational systems in the region. So from here, from the Kick Slack, we're going to share an email with a brief survey about the session so you can answer it. And thank you very much once again. Thank you. Marco, it is not going to be with us. This is his last workshop. So I also want to thank Marco for his work, for his effort. We're going to miss you, Marco. We loved working with you. So thank you for everything you've done for this project. We want to thank you because Marco, he said it before, but he's going to study. He's going to turn or start his PhD program. So thank you, Marco, for everything you've done for this project. We want to thank all of the initiatives. Thank you for your time, for your patience. Many of us are hungry, but this is important. Thank you, Maud. Thank you, Brad. See you soon.